So welcome to everyone. I'm Benjamin Leblanc. I'm manager at Énergie, and I'd like to start by saying a big thank you to Antoine Guillaume, who is an energy and decarbonization lawyer at CMS, and we will share these clear legal insights on the latest developments regarding this compensation of indirect carbon costs. So Antoine, before we dive into this key topic, would you mind introducing yourself and your company?
Yeah, sure. Many thanks, Benjamin, for this invitation. I'm very pleased to speak to you all today. So I'm a lawyer specialized in energy and decarbonization, working at CMS Francis Lefebvre, which is part of the CMS network. CMS network is a large lawyers network having offices all across Europe, and we are constantly ranked in band 1 in project and energy in chambers. So we have a very strong energy practice, maybe one of the largest in Europe. We are particularly proud to advise on all the value chain in relation to energy. So we can advise on regulatory aspects as well as all industrial contracts and energy production and supply. And in France in particular, we have an in-depth knowledge of energy law. For instance, we are commenting the energy code since its creation. And we also have a very good understanding of administration practices and requirements, which can be a real game changer for our clients, because they have to navigate in a very complex landscape and to be in touch in a very regular basis with administration. And of course, being a full service firm, we can offer services in financing, M&A, energy taxes and customs, environmental law, etc. So again, many thanks, Benjamin, Albert, for this invitation. And I'm excited to speak today about those aspects of carbon.
Thank you for joining us today. And so I can say a few words on Énergie. I'm today with Albert Gainsberger, who is consultant in our energy and climate consulting team, and I'm a manager in that team. And this consulting team is one of the two departments of Énergie. The second one is the financing team, mainly operating on the French white certificate mechanism, dispositif des C2E in French. And if we do a slight focus on the consulting team, we support all kinds of companies in succeeding their decarbonization journey, especially the energy-intensive process industries, which are our DNA, I can say. And what topic we can help you? We can help you on the energy sourcing part, so like contract negotiation, PPA and BPA project assessment, but also market exposure. We can design with you your market exposure and hedging strategy. Also about the energetical excellence by doing like on-site energy diagnostics with our standardized toolbox, which is called Énergie. But also investment and strategy, like big investment, strategic investment like e-boilers or BESS battery system on site, etc. And on the sustainability services, we can assist you on a transition plan, climate reporting, or value chain decarbonization. All of these kind of topic. Whenever this is a complex topic on energy and climate, we can help you. So after this quick introduction, here is the agenda for today. So we'll start with the definition of the compensation of indirect cost of CO2. So what is it in practical terms? And then the updates of 2026. So a lot of updates in the recent months. So we'll dig into that. After that, the criteria to become eligible, because it's possible to add new sectors, new industrial production into this mechanism. So we'll see all of that. And then what to do with this aid, because this has to be towards decarbonization projects. We see that, and then we'll end with our recommendations and Q&A sessions. So to begin with, what is it, the compensation of indirect cost of carbon? It is linked with the electricity production in the European country. So as you may know, the electricity price is determined by a merit order of the different power plants. And most of the time, the latest power plants called to fulfill the grid is from fossil fuel. So either gas, coal, or fuel. And these power plants needs to pay for their carbon costs through the ETS system. And so when you are an industrial group, you pay for your electricity, and inside the electricity you have this carbon component. And so this mechanism of compensation of indirect cost is helping these industrials to protect them to pay a bit less their electricity, because their competitors around the world don't pay this carbon cost outside of Europe. So for the scope 1 of the industrial group, this is already covered by the ETS system, the current ETS system, and this mechanism concerns the scope 2, so the cost of carbon inside the electricity. That's it for the definition of the carbon of the mechanism, and then I will let Antoine explain a bit about the latest updates.
Yeah. So just to bounce back on what you just said, I think the carbon compensation scheme is even more relevant considering the current situation in Iran, because we see that there is a sharp rise in the gas price. The gas price has a direct impact on the electricity price. So obviously, industrial players are going to pay the related bill, and any money which can be obtained from the state is good to be obtained. So the compensation of indirect carbon costs is even more relevant for them. Then regarding the legal framework, this is a framework which originates initially from European law in 2003, so kind of old. Then it has been implemented recently in the Commission communication from 2020, the last one. Well, we have this new one we're going to speak later on, but it was the last one covering the 2021-2030 period. So it concerned 11 sectors, 5 subsectors. It defined emission factors, and the aid had to be oriented towards investment in efficiency measures. What is really interesting with this aid is that this is a multi-state aid. So each member state can implement the aid in its own way, complying with the European framework. So for instance, in France, it has been codified in the Énergie code under Article 122.8 and equivalent in the regulatory part. I will not make a law class about this. And we also have an order which defines the parameters to calculate the aid. So the fact that this is a multi-state aid is very interesting, and we'll speak about this later on in this webinar. And I thought this is something good to note, is that there is a strong will from the European Commission and the European instances to protect European industry, the same at the French level. And this scheme has been duly authorized by the European Commission. So this is good to know that this aid, there is no risk of challenge under state aid scheme, because sometimes France implements state aid which has not been notified or authorized, and then there are claims for reimbursement. But this is a very strong, well-established and legally established regime, which is a true opportunities for industrials, because there is a real political will to allow them to benefit from this aid. And I think we can speak about the update of this aid, and I will let you, Benjamin, speak of it.
Yeah, I will let that there.
Actually, yeah, I'll figure it out. Yeah. Thank you, Antoine, for presenting the first part of the mechanism, which was, as we said, updated quite recently at the beginning of 2026, in a context of increasing risk of carbon leakage for sectors. So this was This is an amendment to the initial guidelines, mainly expanding the sectors which are eligible, as well as raising the maximum aid intensity to 80%. Expanding the sectors so explicitly by listing additional ones. Initially, we had 10 sectors, now we have 20 on top of the existing ones, as well as expanding the eligibility for new sectors if they fulfill a certain set of criteria, which we will speak about later. But this is very interesting because some of the sectors which were existing in the 2020 communication are increasingly at risk of carbon leakage, and this is illustrated by the increasing in the maximum aid amounts, which is now 80%. And the new sectors have the previous cap of 75% maximum aid. Also, technically, the emission factors have been updated in this communication based on more recent data. And there is also an interesting possibility with the investment options. So it is more open towards investments facilitating electricity flexibility with investments such as battery storage, renewables, or system flexibility. As we said earlier, this is a European scheme that is then transcribed into national law. We're still waiting for the precise transcription. In the communication, there is a notice that the member states should notify, if necessary, their existing schemes before June 30th of 2026, which is quite soon. So we should expect some communication about potential adjustments in the guidelines in the upcoming month. This will also validate the scope of sectors. This will also validate the emission factor, which is to be set in a decree, etc. So we have to keep our eyes open to the new member state regulation at the state level. And now, if we dive into the sectors a little bit more, here are the entire sectors which are covered by the mechanism, both from the initial 2020 list, which are here shown in blue in the initial scope, and all the new sectors that were included in the 2026 updates in yellow. So you'll notice that there are sectors and what we call products, which are, so sectors are shown by the NAS number, which is in French the NAF number, which is a 4-digit number. So for example, if we take iron at the top left corner, we see the 4 digits which signal that this is a NACE number. If we look at the very bottom of the slide, we see, for example, mixed alkyls, which is an 8 digits PRODCOM number, which is production communautaire. It's a statistical tool at the European Commission. It is quite important to see the difference between the two, because eligibility relies mainly on the sector, and for some of them, as you can see, the few PRODCOM that are listed here also qualify for eligibility. But then the calculation of the aid itself, as we'll see later, is product specific. So you'll need to juggle between the NACE to see if you're eligible, and then the PRODCOM number to see how much you can actually benefit from this aid. We can also see that a bunch of new, I would say, super sector like categories were expanded. So, for example, metal mining, food, beverages, as well as electrical equipment. This is a strong signal that those industries are more at risk of carbon leakage, and were included in the scheme. I think that's it for this one.
Yeah. So for the next part, if you are not in the list, this is not over, because they open a possibility to add new sectors if they respect some criteria, and that's exactly what we want to say in that slide. So the three criteria to respect to be added to the list are just there. The first one is about the indirect emission intensity. So this is a CO2 emission in electricity per unit of economic output. And this criterion is to be above 0.32 kilogram of CO2 per euro. and we'll see the detail of this formula just in the next slide. But the second criterion is about the trade intensity, is whether your sector is exposed to the international competition or not. And the third criterion is about indirect carbon leakage indicator. So if there is any risk of, you have to be at risk of carbon leakage to be eligible to this mechanism like that. And so to become eligible, you have to be validated by an independent expert and to have some data covering minimum 3 years of activity to justify you respect these 3 criteria. And then the details of these criteria. For the first one, indirect emission intensity, the formula is just here. So you take the electricity consumption per unit of production, and then you multiply it by the electricity emission factors, which are listed in the Commission communication. So for example, it was 0.51 ton of CO2 per megawatt hour for France. So this is a fixed value for France, and each country has a different number. And then you divide these two elements by a gross value added here. And so by doing so, you have a unit, a kilogram of CO2 per euro. And if you are above 0.32, you respect this criterion. So this is to focus only on the electro-intensive sectors. So industrial groups which consume a lot of electricity per added value. Then the second criteria, the trade intensity, it measures sector exposure to international competition, and it reflects the importance of imports and exports related to total EU production. So the formula just here, for a sector, a specific sector, you take all the imports and exports, you add all of that, and then you divide by the imports plus the EU production of the concerned sectors. And by doing so, if this is above 20%, the trade intensity criterion is respected, and then so you check this criterion. And the third one, so indirect carbon leakage indicator, is only a multiplier between the trade intensity and indirect emission intensity. So you multiply the two first criteria to have the third one, and if this is above 0.064, this explains that you have at risk of carbon leakage, and so you can be eligible to the mechanism. So to summarize a bit, you have to be electro-intensive and to be at risk of carbon leakage to candidate to be added to this mechanism, compensate for your indirect carbon cost. And then for this part, I will let Albert take over.
Sure. So this is about the amount of aid you could benefit from directly. So as we said earlier, this is dependent on this is calculated at the product level. So the eligibility is mostly based on the sector your industry is in. How much you gain is based on the products you're making. So this is reflected. I'll take each item one by one. So aid intensity is, as we said earlier, 80% for what we say legacy sectors, so the sectors that were in the first communication, and 75% for newly eligible sectors. Then you have the emission factor that Benjamin defined earlier, which is the same one that is listed in the annex of the communication. And then, of course, you have the price of the EU allowance for the previous year. So, for example, for the 2025 aid application, I mean, to get compensation for the year 2025, you will look at the forward price of EU allowance from the previous year, so 2024, which in our example was 69 euro per ton of CO2. And then you have the electricity volume, and this is where what I was saying earlier about the product specificity comes in, because the electricity volume is calculated in two ways. The first way is by multiplying the production of your products in tons by an applicable electricity efficiency benchmark. This applicable electricity efficiency benchmark is listed in the annex of the communication following the initial communication. So we expect that there will be an upcoming update to those efficiency benchmarks, which are again at the product level. So the 8 digits Prodcom number will have, if they are listed, an efficiency benchmark. And then you'll just have to multiply this by the production of the specific product. The second case is if there is, the product you're manufacturing is not explicitly listed in the list, then they will have what is called the fallback electricity efficiency benchmark, which was fixed in 2021 at 80% and reduces by a percentage every year. I think it's 1.09%. So for 2025, we're at about 77%. And you multiply this by the actual electricity consumption. So again, this is product specific. This is where data collection may be a little bit challenging. You have to look at the production of your specific product, which may be a little bit of a challenge. We also note down that there is an additional aid which can be added if the uncovered extra indirect cost of CO2 is above 1.5% of the company's gross value added. So this is something you can calculate as well.
We stay just 1 second in that slide. If we do a quick calculation of the order of magnitude of the aid behind this mechanism, so a quick calculation, you take the 80% for legacy sector, for example, multiplying by 0.5, multiplying by the 69 euro per ton of CO2. Just by multiplying the three values, you get something around 30 euro per megawatt hour. So this is the order of magnitude of the aid you can gain from this mechanism. So this is not this is something quite important and which can make the difference for your activity, because this is something something quite very important.
Now into the next slide. Yeah, this is how to where to orient the investments you have to make with this compensation. The idea is to orient them towards decarbonization investments. There is a specificity for France, which we talk about, but at the European level, the communication of 2020 listed 3 options, which you can see on the slide, and the 2026 communication added a 4th one, so keeping the first 3, but in total now we have 4 different options towards which we can orient the subsidies. The first one is, so when you do the compensation, when you ask for compensation, you have to submit an energy audit, with a certain set of recommendations. The first option is to simply implement those audit recommendations. The second option is to make sure that at least 30% of your electricity must be decarbonized. The third option is to reinvest at least 50% of the compensation amount into various projects that substantially reduce greenhouse gas emissions at the installation. Once again, which has to be well below the EU-ETS free allocation benchmark. And finally, the 4th option, new in 2026, is to contribute to the electricity system by enhancing system flexibility or reducing electricity system costs. So this is at the flexibility. It's to play with the flexibility of your electricity consumption by installing, for example, electricity storage, developing demand-side flexibility, or installing energy efficiency measures affecting electricity demand, for example. Those are, of course, just a few examples. Now for the specific case of France. In the Code de l'Énergie, the Article 22.8 that we saw earlier, which is the baseline in the Code de l'Énergie of this compensation, they say that you have to implement those first 2 options. So the audit, which in France is a little bit particular, it's called a PPE, so a performance and an energy plan, which it's the next slide. I mean, we'll see a bit after what exactly the PPE is. And on top of that, you need to cover at least 30% of your electricity consumption with decarbonized electricity, which in France should be easy. The third one is not explicitly listed as a possibility of investment in France. And the fourth one, of course, we're still waiting on the specifics, and we'll see in what form exactly this will be possible. This is still a point of uncertainty, and we'll have to wait for the state application. Now maybe I can hand it to you, Antoine, to speak about some legal options.
Sure. Thank you, and maybe I can explain you what a lawyer can do for you. As you probably know, the ASP used to advance industrial a small amount of the aid for the year, which was the year N. Or any advance. So there is a mechanism under business law which is very interesting for industrial, which is a debt assignment. So basically, it will allow you to improve your cash flow, your balance sheet structure, and your financial visibility. And how it works, you will obtain financing by assigning your aid claim before its term to a credit institution or an authorized fund in exchange for immediate payment of the assignment price. So the bank basically will retain a small amount to be paid for these services, but you will obtain immediate cash for the aid which has to be paid in the next year. So this financing can be obtained in very favorable terms because the assignee primarily assumes the risk associated with the debtor of the aid claim. And another thing which is really interesting to point here is that this is a multi-state aid scheme. So if you're an industrial with assets in several European countries which implement this aid, you can benefit from how to say it? You can use the aid in several states and mobilize it in a single transaction to obtain cash in relation with those aids in those several states, and then use this cash in a single state. So you can really use this aspect of European law and benefit from the fact that it is in several states.
This next slide is about PPE.
PPE. Just a quick focus on what the PPE is. Again, it's the audit followed by an action plan that is applicable in France. PPE applies to, so PPE is a plan de performance énergétique in French. It applies only to large companies, which are defined as companies with an average annual final energy consumption above 23.6 gigawatt hour. So other smaller companies will not need to provide a PPE. They will simply make demand directly to the ASP. So for large companies, they need to make the demand to the ASP and establish a PPE. The PPE is a three-phase process, starting with an audit. The audit can be either an ISO 50001 energy management system audit or an energy audit. In both cases, they need to cover at least 80% of the company's total energy bills. Then with this audit, you can devise an action plan where you identify energy efficiency investments, which must include all the actions identified in the audit, with a payback period of more than 3 years. And finally, you submit the PPE to the regional prefects, who controls and validates the PPE. What's interesting to us may be point 2, which is the action plan. Once you've done your audits, you're going to have to fill in basically an Excel file, which is I mean, a file where you have to list the different sites which could be eligible for the compensation, where you put the total energy consumption per site as well as the energy bills per site. Then you list the different audits. This part is to make sure that the spreadsheet reviews cover at least 80% of the energy bills. Then you list the action plan, where basically you copy and paste action plans from the audits and justify if it is included in the PPE or not, and put an expectation of the energy and financial gains, as well as investments. Finally, you need to approve this PPE by a certified independent auditor before you can send it to the prefect. Now, to get an idea of the timeline of this whole process, it starts soon, actually, at the end of March 2026, with the submission of the file, I mean, of the demand to the ASP to get the 2025 aid. So this is, we have to note that to benefit from the 2025 aid, you must be one of the sectors that was initially listed in the 2020 communication. So one of the 12 initial sectors. This only applies to them for now. Starting in next year, the additional sectors that are listed and the new ones that may be eligible, as we saw earlier, if they fail, I mean, if they respect the 3 criteria we explained, then those might be available. But for now, so you must submit the file to SAP by the end of March 2026. Then, by the end of November, you need to submit the PPE to the prefect. By then, you must have done the audit, must have done the action plan, must have it approved by an auditor. So it's quite a short timeline. Then 2 years later, in 2028, you have a first follow-up in which 50% of the planned investments must have been committed. And then a year later, a second follow-up where 100% of planned investments must have been committed, and at least 50% put into service. So that's it for the PPE.
Yeah. Thank you, Adam. We can go to our recommendation after all of these insights. The first recommendation we can give you is to check your eligibility. Check if your NACE code or ProdCom is inside the list we showed earlier, we displayed earlier. And if you think you can respect the 3 criteria we presented, please go in that direction. And because there is a lot of money at stake, nearly 30 euro per megawatt hour at the maximum. So yeah, go in that direction. About the becoming eligible, do you want to add your insight on that topic, Antoine?
Yes, sure. So obviously, justify the carbon leakage nature of your activity to make your activity eligible, and maybe be aware, because we saw a lot of litigation in relation to ASP, which is basically able to initiate retrospective checks of eligibility, and they can claim reimbursement of aid they paid you, and they will basically operate a compensation, and they will reclaim you the aid. And if you are eligible to be paid a new aid, the ASP can compensate between the aid they must pay you and the aid they consider you were not eligible for. So as soon as the aid you're going to ask to ASP is important, we really recommend you to seek assistance either from ACE, either from lawyers or both, when putting together your application, just to check that this is a strong application and the ASP cannot challenge it later on.
After that, we also strongly recommend you to assess the financial impact of the new regulation. So, for example, to assess the aid with the updated 2026 methodology. But also there are other changes, like the increase from 75 to 80% of the aid intensity for the legacy sector, so the one eligible since 2020. And then another aspect, maybe to quantify the impact of the raising CO2 forward prices. In the recent days, these prices were more going through. We're decreasing, I can say, but maybe it's something really punctual. And then all the assessment for the following years say that these prices will certainly rise. And so to quantify this impact of a rising CO2 forward price could be also interesting to assess the aid you can have through the mechanism of compensation of indirect costs. After that, we'll let Antoine talk about the monitor regulation.
Yes. So basically, there are a few adjustments that must be made in the energy code. For instance, the 80% factor is not yet reflected in Article 122.8 of the Energy Code. So obviously, because of this political will to help industrials, it is very likely that this will be adopted before the deadline, which is June 30th, 2026. So we really advise you to monitor the next regulations. We will do so also, and of course, we will share with you any updates we have on the small adjustments that are necessary in the legal text for this new scheme to be fully operational under French law.
All right, and then the last recommendation, we suggest to be very careful about the different deadlines. For example, for those who were eligible in 2025 to submit before March 31 of 2026. And even if the file is incomplete, you can drop the file, and then after that you have 1 month to finalize it if there is any missing information. So yeah, I strongly recommend to submit something before end of the month, and then you have more extra time to finalize it. And also to be careful about the PPE, to submit it to the regional prefect. This is a different calendar, so this is the end of the year. So yeah, there are quite a lot of different deadlines. So be aware to respect all of them because there is a financial aspect at stake. I think we are good on these recommendations. We can move on to the Q&A session. So do not hesitate to ask your question either in the question button or the chat button. We look at that.
I think there was a question in the chat.
Yeah. There was a question about the aid is a result of explicit computation of the carbon content of the electricity bought. For example, if we bought RN or renewable PPA, it was possible to obtain this aid. There is no specific case depending on what you do of your purchasing strategy. This is something very generic. So you have one value of the emission factor for all France. So it does not depend on what you do if you buy some RN or some PPA. So yeah, this is you can get the aid even if you decarbonize your electricity supply, because this is something generic for all the industrial plants. And then I see another question about the aid application. Does the aid apply to the company's head office or to each site, each product line? On that, I may answer something. So yeah, the aid is toward a SIRET number. So for that, it's not about the head office or the SIREN. It's really on the SIRET. So each site, there is a different specific calculation on each site assess all of the criteria we saw earlier. Even if there are different products inside the plant, you have to make the right calculation for each line of products. If there is, for example, a product outside the mechanism, but at the end, the aid is linked to the CRET numbers of the site, the plant. I don't know if there is any other questions, or if you have something to add, Antoine, to this question, or
maybe something in relation to the question related to the emission factor, which is in fact really interesting, because the emission factor has been adapted for each European country. And where the energy mix is more dependent on fossil fuel, like in Germany or Poland, you have an emission factor which is higher, and the aid is higher. So here again, this is a real opportunity when you can proceed to an assignment of, let's say, your German aid or your Polish aid, and then use it at the level of the holding through a cash pooling agreement or anything, and then you can move the money you received towards assets which are not in Germany or Poland. So you can really play with the emission factors in various European countries. This is really interesting.
Thank you very much for this. I don't think there is any other questions. So and we are perfectly in time. So I hope this session has been helpful and informative. If you have any questions coming to mind later, feel free to reach out, either Antoine or Albert or me. We will answer you on these questions. And I think we can end this meeting. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great rest of the day. Thanks, Antoine.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.